Okay, so the bed that you guys were saying, the bed that you lived in is downstairs, and why did you bring your bed that you were born in to your house today?
The bed I was born in is downstairs in the lakeside bedroom, and we brought it after my mother passed away and she sold her house. Then we moved it to Moorhead, Minnesota, and from Moorhead, Minnesota, when we retired in Moorhead, we brought it to Park Rapids, where we exist and live right now today.
What was your family structure growing up? Your parents' names? Did you have any siblings? And were you the oldest or youngest child?
I was born in 1929, but I had an older brother, but he died at childbirth. And I had one sister, Sylvia, who lives in Baltimore, Maryland. My dad's name is George Bernard Masons. He went to South St. Paul High School through the 8th grade. He didn't even go to high school. My mother was born in Austria-Hungary, came across, immigrated to the United States with her parents, and my grandfather and grandmother got a job in South St. Paul, Minnesota, because of the relative that they had living there. They worked at the packing house, meat packing house. And my mother went to 10th grade, and then she had to go to work, so not too much educational background with my parents.
Now, you said a meat packing house, and that's a meat packing house in St. Paul, Minnesota, right?
South St. Paul.
South St. Paul, Minnesota. And I know I've heard you tell some stories about your dad telling you stories about the meatpacking house. What were the conditions like in the meatpacking house in South St. Paul?
Well, my dad came across, or was born here. He was had German ancestry, but he was born in South St. Paul. His father, Andrew Masons, was a well-known loading dock boss in the meatpacking business in Swift and Company. Very tough place to work. And he was in charge of the loading dock, so he had some big, strong guys that lugged half carcasses of beef to load them onto rail cars or into trucks, refrigerated trucks. My dad was a butcher. He butchered sheep and calves. He was a skinner, and it was one of the first processes that occurred in the packing house. Grandpa came over here from Austria, and he made 19 cents an hour and worked in the hide cellar, which is after the cattle was killed, they skun them, and then they preserved the hides and salted them down and stacked them about 6 feet high. Those hides were used for leather, for shoes, and other things they made out of leather. Dad started working for 39 cents an hour, and those were probably slave wages then, and that's why the unions came about, and the AFL-CIO represented the meat packers, workers. So they, in turn, the unions helped get reasonable wages for the workers that worked at the packing house.
Were you named for anybody in your family?
No, I was supposed to be named Richard, but my mother's best friend was going to have a baby, and she chose Richard, and I was second choice, and the second name was Ronald. And never did like my first name. Most of the time I'm known as Ron or Ronnie. But that's how I got my name.
What do you consider your ethnicity?
Well, I'm German and Austrian and Hungarian as far as background of national countries. But totally I'm an American citizen, and I'm very proud to be an American. And I was taught at a young age that the importance of education and to be loyal to your community and to your country. So it was ingrained into me at a young age how important it was where your background was. But it was also taught that you can overcome any adversity and become anything you want to be. So I had some pretty good solid background as far as education is concerned.
Did your mom or dad ever tell you any legends or tales from that were like native to Austrian, Hungarian, or German ancestry?
Yeah, as far as my mother's concerned, they escaped under military tyranny from Europe. They were caught trying to escape. Grandpa ran the horses for royalty, a very rich family in Austria. And my grandmother was a cook and seamstress for that family. But things were getting pretty tough and they wanted to get out of there, and America was a dream for a lot of people at that time in Europe. And my grandfather had a brother who was in South St. Paul, and he sent them enough money to come across. They tried to escape, and they went to Bremerhaven in Germany, but they were caught by the authorities, put in jail, and brought back to Austria. But again, the second time they were let out of jail, and then they escaped again and kind of hitchhiked to the port of Bremerhaven. And from there they took a cattle boat across the Atlantic, and when they were in the cattle boat, they never saw daylight. They were down in a hole, and the sailors used to come up and let them come up at night to get some fresh air. And they landed in Baltimore, Maryland, Chesapeake Harbor. And from Baltimore, they took a train all the way across the United States to St. Paul to meet his relatives.
When you were a young child, did your mother ever tell you any nursery rhymes or any type of like childish stories that you can remember?
Well, the big storybook at the time when I was growing up was called Grimm's Fairy Tales. It was a pretty thick book, and they used to read stories to me, mother and grandmother. My grandmother died very early. She slipped on the ice and had a brain concussion and died. And I remember that even though I was very young, but they had the funeral and the casket right in the house. That's when they did that. So I was born in our house at 251 8th Avenue South, South St. Paul, Minnesota, which is a residential area above the industrial part of South St. Paul. And eventually, of course, Mother tried to go back to school and take more classes, but Grandpa and Grandma needed the money, so she went to work for a company in St. Paul and did accounting for them.
When did you start school?
Well, I started, 5 years after 1934, and had kindergarten. And everything I remember about kindergarten, the only thing I remember about it are about two things. One of the projects we had was to make butter. And the other thing was we had a milk break, and I volunteered to carry the milk bottles from where the dairy dropped them off to our classroom. So we had a milk break, and the milk at that time came in little tiny bottles. And that was a big deal back then. So kindergarten was mostly play, really, at that time.
Growing up, who did you consider your best friends, and do you have stories? A favorite story from each one?
Well, the best friend I had, who lived halfway down the block, and the block that we lived on, the regular city block, had 32 boys on it, so there were some girls, but mostly boys. Back then, families had huge families. We were one of the smallest with only 2 children. As I said before, I would have had an older brother, so there would have been 3 in our family. My sister Sylvia, of course, grew up, she's 5 years younger. But best friend Bob Shear, who became the quarterback at our football team and also played hockey with him, he went on to start, he was recruited for the University of Minnesota to play quarterback, and Bud Johnson, another friend of mine, was a halfback. I kind of tagged along. We were all out for freshman football at the U. The other 2 quit football, and Bob went on to go in the Army and serve his country in the Army. Bud Johnson went on, dropped football after the second year, and he became a commander in the Navy, and he was a naval engineer. But Bob Shear and I met each other in an unusual circumstance. We were playing halfway between both of our houses, only 5, 6 houses apart, and we got in an argument, a fight. I think maybe we were in the first grade or something, and I hit him with a hose, and he hit me over the head with a rake. And our mothers came out to break up the fight, and that's how they became best of friends, and he was my best of friend. But I played in the state hockey tournament with him. I played football with him. And to this day, he's still my best friend. I see him as much as I can.
What sort of games did you play growing up? Do you have any memories from playing those games?
Well, like I say, we played tackle football in the street. The streets at that time were blacktop or concrete. We happened to live on the corner of a block, and there was an empty lot next to our house. So a lot of times we played baseball or softball in football in that empty lot, but it was a huge amount of children at that time. And so there was always games to be played. But when I did have a lot of people, Bob Shear and I would play a baseball game where we'd throw the ball, rubber ball against the steps. We'd have different rules. What was a single, a double, a triple, or a home run. And one guy would throw the ball and the other guy have to field it. So we had airs, and we didn't have any batting, but we had throwing and makeshift game. The other thing we had is a baseball game where you used to spin a wheel, a board game. And we played that endless in the summertime all the time. And then we had football games that we played. But we'd play every sport that was in season. The other thing we did that was kind of unusual, they used to have soapbox derbies where kids built, we called them chugs. They were old wheels and you build a frame of a car or a truck on top of it. Then we take it to a hill and ride down the hill. No brakes or nothing. And another thing we did with all these guys, we had armies. We'd choose up sides and we'd have swords, lances, and all kinds of makeshifty weapons, and we'd play war games. So those were games that we used to play with. Everything was made up. But we still have pictures of those times in our record books here. So those were things that we did. The other thing we did a lot of back then, the cowboys and the Indians were the good guys and the bad guys. And some of us would be Indians and some of us would be cowboys. And we played like the Western movies at the time. Have new battles and everything else. So all the games and things we had were pretty much made up, although we had bats and balls and gloves and football. We had that. But there wasn't any organized sports that was like it is today at all until we got in junior high. Grade school, you went through 6th grade. We did have 6th grade basketball. But I remember Central School because it was the oldest school in town. And the ceiling was only about 8 feet high. And so you had to shoot a shot that was almost flat trajectory before you could make a basket. Although we were pretty little guys, so it wasn't that big like it is today in a regulation gymnasium. So a lot of games were made up.
Where did you go to high school?
Went to South St. Paul High School.
When did you graduate? What year?
Graduated in 1947. There was 200 in my class. And I remember because I graduated 66 out of 200. And it was just a lot of fun back then. I never thought about going to college at all. And I'm sorry to say I never took a book home in my whole life in grade school or high school. Everything I did, I studied at study hall at school. Athletics was pretty big for some of us guys then after the 6th grade. So.
Besides sports, were you involved in anything else in high school?
I was involved with Boy Scouts and worked my way up to a Life Scout. Then I became a leader of the Boy Scouts. I also was in the Order of the Eagles or the Order of the Arrow and was especially with camping and canoeing trips to northern Minnesota. So we did a lot of that with scouting.
Do you have any memories from those canoeing trips that are any good stories?
Oh yeah, I took a group up out of Ely, Minnesota, and they were kind of new kids, younger kids, and I was in high school. And we were warned not to go near bears. So, but one kid and his partner canoed over where there's some cubs to look at. The mother bear came right swimming out after us in the water. So that's the first time we knew that bears could swim. Another time we were up there, and another crazy kid, he was beating on a trunk of a tree, and there was a porcupine up the tree, and it fell on him, and he was back got full of quills. And I was the one that had to take him back to base camp in Ely. But he was in pain, and all we had at the time as far as first aid was to throw some iodine in his back, and he had to go to the hospital, and they had to pull those quills out. So that ended that canoe trip at that time.
Did you play sports in high school, and what are some memories from those sports, or any like funny stories or like great stories like going to the state tournament and stuff like that?
Well, we played whatever was in season. Fall was football. There was no cross country in high school in those days. And then in the wintertime you played basketball, and then in the spring you played baseball or track. And we had a very good football team. We had a very good coach. He played football for the University of Minnesota, and he was a center. That's one reason I learned how to be a snapper, a long snapper. And basketball we played, and I was the highlight of my career was I scored back. And then when there was no 3-point, I scored 33 points in a game once. But that was pretty unusual because everybody was letting me shoot because I could shoot pretty good. I never was out for trouble. I played baseball, played second base, third base, shortstop, but never could hit the curveball. The coach always said, stand in there and it'll break. And every time I'd stand in there, I get hit in the head. So that ended my baseball career. Actually, I played pretty good softball. We had semi-pro fast-pitch softball. We had very good teams then. But those were independent teams that were outside the school. And the nice thing about South St. Paul, the police department sponsored sports all season of the year, and they'd take care of us and coach us and take us to St. Paul to play games against the big city boys. So we were always involved in athletics, always. And if we didn't do that, we were swimming someplace. There was a lake on the edge of town, and it was Seidel's Lake. I'll never forget that because that's where we went to swimming. We'd go skinny dip and take our clothes off and skinny dip. And that's where we got our swimming lessons in. And eventually South St. Paul built a swimming pool, and we ended up swimming there, and that's where I learned how to swim. I took lesson at the swimming pool. But the Seidel's Lake was a real kind of a outdoor playground for us. It had steep hills, and some of my teammates learned to be very good skiers. And one of the teammates I had in football and hockey was that Harley Woog, who became an all-state in swimming and pole vaulting, football, and he was also a ski jumper. And the other teammate I played with, state tournament in hockey in 1947, Hank Brueggemann, he became a very good skier, a downhill skier, and he's one of the few guys I've ever seen ski on stilts down these big hills that they had in the Twin Cities. Nothing like the Rocky Mountains or the ski resorts in the West, though. So we hung around with guys that were juniors or seniors, and that was about it. And so we had many memories of childhood of makeshift games. If we weren't playing organized sports, then we played in makeshift games ourselves. So we were always busy. We were always outside. We never were inside. There wasn't any television except later on. And the one thing about Seidel's Lake I remember is I was coming home one day, and it was December 7th, 1941, and that was the day the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and the people running up and down the streets yelling, "Pearl Harbor's been..." I didn't know where Pearl Harbor is, and nobody else knew where Pearl Harbor was. And back in those days, Minneapolis and St. Paul papers had paper boys, and they go up and down the streets with extra. Something big happened in the news, whether it be country or whatever it is, and they sell papers, yelling, "Extra, extra." So people would come out of their house and buy a newspaper for a nickel. And now I think it's $1 for some papers. That's where most of the news came from, the newspapers and radio too. There wasn't any television when I grew up, so. And when we did get one, it was black and white and all fuzzy, and you couldn't see anything anyhow. So I never wasn't watching much television. Wasn't any sports on television then either.
I know you've told me a few stories before, specific ones that I've heard. Can you tell me a little bit about what your football coach made you do with hiking the football through the tire?
Yeah, to become more accurate, because we had a lead in a single wing offense. We had to lead the halfback. The quarterback was not under center like you see in the pros today. So we had to lead him about 1 yard or where his hand would extend. And if you didn't put it on that hand, if you go left or you went right, he wouldn't get the ball. So you had to become very accurate. So my coach, John Kulbitsky, put a tire under the goalpost, and then he'd move the tire, swing it, and I'd have to try to put the ball into the tire. And I'd snap the ball 1,000 times a day. So you became pretty proficient at snapping the ball or centering the ball. We had a state hockey tournament team, and first one in South St. Paul's history. We won the consolation. Football, we won the conference championship, which is a pretty good league then. It's called the Suburban Conference, all the suburban cities around St. Paul. And then in baseball, and I played through my junior year, but then the senior year I didn't play. I became the manager. And that's where I got interested in coaching, because the coach, because I wasn't that great a hitter, I was a pretty good fielder, but he said, you can help coach or manage the team. So I actually became the baseball manager my senior year, and they won the conference. So if you go back to South St. Paul, you'll see 1947 team, they were champions in every sport. The basketball team went on to play and win the championship too. In fact, the basketball player played end on their football team, but he went to Mankato State and started for Mankato State. His name was George O'Neill. He still has records in South St. Paul High School, but he was really a good basketball player.
Another story. Can you tell me the story about the hockey game up in White Bear Lake, I believe? The infamous White Bear Lake game?
Yeah, we played White Bear Lake, and they played in the old Hippodrome. It was like an old barn, and on the sides of the boards there was no protection, no glass. Only behind the nets was there some chicken wire. And we were in the regional final, and I was skating down. I played left wing, and I was skating down the ice. The score was 0-0 at that time, and the mailman had just finished delivering the papers. We played in the afternoon, and all of a sudden, out of the blue sky, here comes a mailbag and knocks me over, swings it over the boards and knocks me down on the ice. Our goalie, whose name is Steve Badalich, who's another good friend of mine, became All-State in our senior year. He was a pretty wild guy, so he came out of the nets and attacked the mailman, and pretty soon then both teams were fighting, and the referees had to break it up, and the coaches broke it up. And for our protection, the police department from White Bear came and took us to the jail, and then they held us in the cells or in the building until the South St. Paul Police Department came up and escorted us back home. The game never was finished. So that was a very unusual thing that happened, and even back in those days. So, but all the games we played in hockey were outside. We flooded our own rink, and we went on to beat Robbinsdale to get into the state tournament.
Did you go to college? If so, where? Where'd you go to college?
Went to the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis.
Did you play any sports in college? Do you have any memories of playing? I know you played football, so do you have any memories of the football team?
Played football at Minnesota. Back then, freshmen couldn't play varsity football. So it was after the World War II was over, and we had about 300 freshmen at the time. So Coach Bierman was the head coach. He was a former Marine and very disciplined. And he, in turn, got his old players from the 30s, late 30s, mid-30s to come back and coach the freshman team. So they developed a freshman league, and we played under the lights at Northrop Field, which is right next to Memorial Stadium. And I played on a team that was pretty good because a good friend of mine then from Morrisman, Dave Scrine, was a fullback who eventually became the captain of Minnesota in the senior year. But in those games, we didn't wear any mouthpieces or face masks or anything like that. And my freshman year, I got my most serious injury because I went to tackle a guy, and I caught his shoes in my face, my head, so I got my tooth knocked out, a broken nose, and a brain concussion. And after the scrimmage, after the trainers came and got me dressed after I showered, and I was ready to go home. And then I went, after that, I was a little woozy, of course, didn't know what I was doing. And I walked back in the shower with my street clothes on, took another shower because I was going to go home on the street cup. Well, the trainer came in, the head trainer, Lloyd Stein, came in and said, get him over to the health service right away. And I spent 4 days in the hospital at the University of Minnesota. So and I made the papers, the Minnesota Daily newspaper that week because of my injury. Other than that, was always banged up. And then the sophomore year, you had a bomber squad because they had unlimited numbers out for football. But our B squad, or bomber squad, played the B squads of Iowa and Wisconsin and the nearby small colleges. So usually you didn't play football until your junior year. You had to be very, very, very good to play as a sophomore. And then I finished 3 years, and then I went to work. My last year, I was an assistant coach at South St. Paul High School under my former high school coach. And from then on, after that, I graduated from Minnesota in 1951, enlisted in the Marine Corps, and spent 2 years in the Marine Corps.
I need to put it in closer because it's getting kind of loud out there. There. You can still sit back if you want.
Oh, that's okay. Get there.
Okay. All right. Can you tell me about your time in the Marine Corps?
Well, I went to boot camp in November 1951. I finished 2 sessions of summer school to graduate in 51. And a lot of times athletes took a lighter load during their football season, so you didn't necessarily take a full load of 16 credits. And when I went to boot camp, we went to San Diego. Back then, the Korean War was going on. The reason I enlisted in the Marine Corps because I had 2 friends of mine that were killed in Korea. They were in the Army. And my sister's fiance got killed in Korea, too. And after that, so I was a little bit older. I was 22 years old when I went in the Marine Corps, where a lot of guys were 17 or 18. So I was used to some pretty discipline with my high school coach and my University of Minnesota coach, who was a colonel in the Marine Corps. So I knew some of the things that some of the younger guys didn't know. And on the way to boot camp in San Diego, California, we took a train. And that's how it took a couple of days to go down there, I believe. And we had one break. We got off at Las Vegas, Nevada, and the Marines let us go out for about 4 hours, taking a break, and then we got back on the train. So we went to the casinos, the guys that could get in, and just to see it. We didn't have any money or anything like that, but then we got back on the train, went to San Diego. And the first thing you do when you get there, you stand on 2 yellow feet, and the drill instructor takes over from then on, and then you really learn discipline from the DI. The second thing you do that I remember anyhow, you all sit on a garbage can and they come in and they shave your hair off. So you're all bald-headed and you're all the same. And then from then on I went through 10 weeks of boot camp because they're accelerated program because the war was going on in Korea. Today the boot camp is now 16 weeks and they go to a little different thing, but the basic training is pretty much the same from way back when, since World War II till it is today. But there's more opportunities in service now because you can go into service and for every year in the service you can get a year of college education. So lately I've been helping the Marine Corps recruit at different state tournaments and been to the state fair and Minnesota games and stuff like that. So the Marine Corps. Then when I was in the Marine Corps, they sent me, most of the guys that I were in the infantry or a unit, and they were shipped right over to Korea. Out of 76 men on my platoon, I think 54 were killed. So that's why I feel kind of obligated and guilty because I could have been one of those guys. But because I had my college education, there were 7 of us who had college, some kind of education. They sent us to schools. And they sent me to pre-flight school in Pensacola. But when I was in Pensacola, I went up with a trainer, with an instructor pilot, and we went through combat techniques. And I got too dizzy all the time, so they put me back on the ground and sent me to ordnance school. That's machine guns and rifles and 30mm cannons that were on aircraft. So I kept going to schools all the time at the beginning of the Marine Corps. And then when I got through in 52, because I had a football background, I was assigned a head coaching job at El Toro, California, and I coached the base team. Back then, a lot of professional athletes were coming back, and college graduates and some high schools. So we had a combination at El Toro, some pretty good professional athletes, some college graduates, and also some high school athletes. And we had a pretty good team. Back then, those days, every military base had some athletic teams, and they played other Navy or Army teams. So I think we played 6 games that fall. And then after that, I was sent back to Minnesota, and I became a recruiting sergeant in Minneapolis area. And then I visited all the high schools in the Twin City area and gave talks about the Marine Corps and tried to get enlistments. So I'm still involved with the Marine Corps today because I'm in the Marine Corps League. The Marine Corps has a saying, once a Marine, always a Marine. So we still are involved with that right today.
What was your first job outside of the Marine Corps? You became a teacher. Where was your first teaching job at? Teaching and coaching.
During the summer I had a lot of part-time jobs, but I was in the cement business and learned that trade. But my first teaching job when I got out was at Graceville, Minnesota. It's a small town in western Minnesota. And it was a situation where the previous coach there was a friend of mine. He went on to Hopkins, Minnesota to coach. And I got the job at Graceville. Back then I think I had 72 offers to coach. Today it's a little tougher. But back then nobody had a car, so I had to borrow $100 to buy a junker, and we drove that car out to Graceville to get interviewed. And the hood flew off the car, so I came into town with a two-tone 47 Chevrolet without a hood. And needless to say, I didn't know what I was getting into, except when I went to school to meet the superintendent principal, the secretary said they're out in the West Lake, which is west of the downtown area, which is a town of about 500. And so I got interviewed in a duck blind because they were building a duck blind. And right away I thought, this is a place for me because I love hunting. And I got the job. So the interesting thing about being hired, being offered the job right away was I had to meet the school board that night in the liquor store. And it was a Catholic Irish town, and everybody in town just about drank. So the superintendent told me that if they offer you a drink, they're going to test you, see what kind of guy you are. So he says, if they offer you a drink, take it. So I had my first beer in Graceville with the school board. Unusual thing. And from there I went to Morris, Minnesota, where I had some success coaching there and teaching Phi Ed.
Throughout your career, what would you consider to call yourself, your occupation? I mean, you're a teacher and a coach, but what would you like to be known? What would you say your occupation was throughout your whole career?
There's no difference. When you coach, you're teaching. And when you're coaching, you're teaching. And when you're teaching, you're coaching kids. And a very famous football coach told me that. His name was Woody Hayes. He was a head coach at Ohio State. I was fortunate enough early in my career to be on a clinic with Joe Paterno, who's still coaching today at Penn State, and Woody Hayes. And I learned more, and probably one night, I remember we were drawing X's and O's on the table at the Holiday Inn Motel where they were staying, and about football. And Woody Hayes was a very, very knowledgeable man and interested in military history. And he and his wife would go up into the mountains in Colorado in the off-season, and he'd read about military history. And you apply the things of military history to coaching football. So I've always been interested in both of those things.
Are you married, and who is your wife?
Did I get married?
Yes. When and who is she?
Well, when I had very strict rules, as you probably know, and I never allowed dating of my athletes during football season. Now, today you might be thinking that's pretty hard to do, but everybody went along with it except one mother, and she didn't think that was right, but I tried to straighten her out. And funny thing, because I remember that kid very vividly, he became a priest. So, but I had a rule where you didn't date, so I was still single. And then I ate breakfast and supper at the place called the Merchant's Hotel. There was a cafe in the existing hotel in Morris. And this girl who was a teacher in the 6th grade came by, and she looked very attractive. Well, she still is. So after the football season was over, then I started dating this little girl from Erskine, Minnesota, and her name is Barbara Benson. And we got married even between sports at Christmas time, because I didn't want to interfere with coaching, because I coached all year round. So we had she was a girl from a small town in northern Minnesota, a Lutheran, and I'm a Roman Catholic, and we got married in December 28th, and we've been married ever since. 52 years, I think it's correct. 53, something like that.
So it's 50. It's going on 54, Ronnie.
54. See.
Going to be 54.
Okay, 53 going on 54 years. And it's been a mixed marriage and a blessed one. We had 5 children, and we got 6 grandchildren, and it's been great.
What are your children's names and ages?
Oh boy. I know their names. Elizabeth's the oldest. And then came Linda, and then came Bob, and then came Nancy, and then came Pam. And we had 5 children in 6 years. So we had a family very quick, because I was 28 when I got married, and my wife was 24. I'm 4 years older than my wife.
How old were you when your children were born? Were you 28, 29?
Oh, let's see, I was 29 when Elizabeth was born. And then we had those...
29 to about 35.
29 to 35, okay. Anyway, we had them very quickly, and when Barb went to faculty meetings, I remember that because she had maternity clothes on every fall just about for 5-6 years then. So we had a very, very blessed marriage. We had 5 great children.
So I know you're a coach, and what would you say are 3 of your favorite stories from coaching?
Oh boy, that's a lot of them. A lot of stories. Well, I coached, I guess, being successful at Morris High School was the first one. Although at Graceville we played 9-man football and we extended the state record to 33 games without a loss. And then I went to Morris High School. The guy that was there before me was the quarterback at Minnesota. His name was Jim Malosky, who eventually went to Edina and eventually went into University of Minnesota Duluth. But we won, I think, 70% of our football games at Morris, and we were one of the smaller schools in that conference. Wilmer was the big thing, and well, I still get invited to reunions. In fact, next week I'll be going to Morris for our 50-year reunion of that team that was in 1961, and winning the championship then. And then I went to Moorhead State, and there was lots of stories there, of course, but I guess it's the athletes, people that made me what I am. You know, when you got guys that compete with a broken leg, compete with 102 temperature, never quit running. I challenged a guy, John Tiemann, who somebody challenged him to run the freeway from Moorhead to Minneapolis, St. Paul, 235 miles, and he did that. When you got guys like that competing for you, it's pretty easy to be successful. In fact, the president of the class of 61 in high school, he was a pole vaulter and a miler in the track at the same time. He was also my quarterback. And this weekend I'm going to Morris for this reunion. I've got a letter that I keep on my den wall. And he wrote thanking me for pushing him so hard, because out of the 20 people that applied for the doctorate and took the doctorate test, he's the only one that passed it. And he eventually went on to become the president of the University of California. But he tells me all the time because of how we pushed him in practice all the time. I just never have the word can't. You've heard that yourself. I don't believe in the word can't. You can do anything if you want to do it. You got to work at it, and no matter what the consequences are, how much you suffer, you can pull it off. So those were some of the things. But the athletes that I coached, the teams, and then the other thing, coaching a kid that was tied to world record in the 60-yard dash, who went on to become into the Mexico Olympic Games and go through the semifinals. And I think he had a shot to win the Olympic. He was from Trinidad, a foreign country, foreign islands. But he pulled a hamstring in the finals. But he was the fastest starter I've ever seen, even to this day. The only guy that comes close to him now is this Bolt kid. And that's the kind of kids I had. But some of them have God-given talent. But as a coach, you have to find the key that turns on every athlete. And for instance, I had a kid, I had pretty strict disciplinary rules we had. And if you got in trouble, I didn't give up on a kid. And one of them, he's now a multimillionaire. He's donated and he started an endowment in my name, which is $250,000. It's the second largest endowment in Moore history. But he got in a fight on campus, and back those days, the campus cops came and got him and took him downtown. But he didn't want his dad to know about this. He came from Fargo, North Dakota. His dad was a very influential man in Fargo. So I always told him, if you're in trouble, give me a call. My phone is there and the door is open. So he called, and I went down to the police force, police station, got him out, and took him up to the football field. And I turned the football field lights on, and just he and I were out there, and I ran him to 2:30 in the morning until he couldn't even walk. He threw up everything he had in his guts, and he thanked me for not telling his dad. From that day on, he's probably been my most loyal supporter, and he donates thousands and thousands of dollars to Moore State University. In fact, I'm just helping him getting 2 more athletes on the alumni board, and he was quite a kid. So those are the type of guys I had, and I had a successful team. We in track and field, we won. Out of 20 years I coached there, we won 18 indoor and outdoor championships. So, and I didn't run track and field in my whole life. All I did is apply the things I learned in my younger days from a high school coach, from a college coach, and from the United States Marine Corps. So it's just a matter of disciplining yourself and stay to your goals and stick to them. You have to make a physical commitment, a mental commitment, and a religious commitment. And you make those 3 things to yourself and work at it, you're going to be successful. I don't care who you are. I mean, you got to be very unselfish, but hard work still pays off, like it did in the old days and does today. So it's more than talent to be great. I don't care if you're coaching, teaching, dentist, whatever you will be. I don't care what it is. If you stick to your guns and have high standards and high morals, you're going to be successful. And we got kids that are coaching and teaching and presidents. I got 2 of them that are presidents of universities. I got FBI agents, Secret Service guys, businessmen, lawyers, doctors, dentists. They all played for me, and they all were on the same teams as the other guys were.
Have you traveled to other states?
Have I traveled to other states?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been to all 50 states.
All 50 states. And can you tell me the story of how you got kicked out of the White House?
Well, Mom and I were there with, I think, Liz and Linda, and we were on a special tour arranged by my sister and brother-in-law. My brother-in-law was a master sergeant in Korea at the age of 19. And he got us an audience with the president there on a trip. But the 2 girls started crying all the time, so they asked us to leave the White House. And I don't remember if I went out with them by myself or Mother did, and she continued on.
What time do you have to leave?
I got time.
Do you have to go?
Not yet.
Okay. How many other countries have you been to besides the United States?
Well, Northern Hemisphere, Canada, Mexico, and then we landed in Germany, and then we had the honor and privilege of going to the Athens Olympic Games, so we're in Greece. But other than that, that's mostly, I haven't been overseas that much.
Do you have any jokes or riddles from your life that you like to tell every once in a while?
I'm not a great joke teller. If I do get a joke, I can't remember them. So I don't have any unusual jokes to tell. In fact, I do a lot of speaking, and a lot of speakers break the ice, so to speak, with a joke to start with. But if I try to tell a joke, I wouldn't remember half of it. So not too many jokes, although I like to laugh.
Was there any reason for the names that you gave your children? Any stories behind those names?
Well, Elizabeth was named after my mother's best friend. That was her name, Elizabeth Shear. He was the mother of my best friend, Bob Shear, who was the quarterback in football. And Linda was, I don't know if Linda was named after anybody or not. Bob was named after my best friend, Bob Shear. His middle name is Gary, Robert Gary. Gary was the two greatest football players I had at Morris High School, so that's how they got the Gary's his middle name. Nancy, I think mother and I agreed on that. I don't know. And Pam, I don't know. I don't know why they. Not no special reason. There was one supposed to be Laura because my wife's Barbara's grandma's name was Laura, so that's a factor in it. But you'd have to ask Barbara what those were.
Do you have any sayings besides the ones that you've already said that you like to use on occasion? I know the hard work and you can't's not in the vocabulary, but do you have any other sayings that you like to use a lot?
All right, offhand, I guess I'd say the three keynote things are the 3 Ds: desire, determination, dedication. If you stick to those 3 Ds and the 3 principles, you can go a long way with your belief in that, and you're putting in the time and effort and sacrifice.
Do you have any nursery rhymes that you remember from when you were a child that you and your friends used to say? No?
Not a one. I'm not into poetry either.
Was there any urban legends in the St. Paul area when you were growing up?
Urban legends? I don't know if there's any urban legends except the ones that we had in athletics, and I don't know if they're legends or not.
You mentioned the Grimm tales earlier. Do you remember what your favorite tale was? Did you have a favorite tale?
Oh, I had to do probably with Hansel and Gretel and the 3 pigs and stuff like that. And I don't remember too much of that stuff.
Did you have any traditions in your house that were different than some of the other, the Italian neighborhoods or the Scandinavian neighborhoods in town?
Well, South St. Paul, yeah, was a mixture of a lot of different nationalities. And one thing that was unusual, even though we had a packing house and a stockyard where they had multicultural and different racial people, the only black I've ever seen through high school almost was a janitor at the police department. They nicknamed him Snowball, which is kind of derogatory. And then there was a Mexican family in the town, so that's the only two non-white races. But otherwise, South St. Paul is a multi-racial.
Did you have any in your own home? Did you have any traditions that were because of your German, Austrian, Hungarian heritage?
Well, most of them probably related to food.
Okay. So food. So, what kind of traditional foods did you guys eat in your home?
Well, the things I remember, the things we liked, but my mother used to can just about every vegetable and fruit there was. And our fruit basin was quite a huge place. And we had grapes in the yard, and Grandpa and Dad would make wine, and we have barrels of wine down there. They make homemade root beer. They made homemade ice cream. And we have all these things. Potatoes were spoiled in a bin. But every day of the week was kind of a different day. I think Monday was cleaning day, and Tuesday was wash day, and Wednesday was ironing day. One of my duties was have to clean the house. And one day it was for bakery, and one day it was for cleaning. So you kind of fell into a routine, a rhythm with your duties you had at home.
Did you have any feasts that you guys celebrated that maybe?
Well, yeah, Thanksgiving was big, like every Thanksgiving. You always had a turkey. Easter, you always had a ham. But my mother made German strudel and the foods of the native country, Austria. And we'd have certain kind of foods that.
Can you describe maybe one or two of the foods that you ate that were native to your parents' homeland?
Well, one thing that we had was always nut strudel, and then she made homemade donuts where she'd put them in a deep fry and raise them, similar to what you buy in the bakery today. But most of the baking was done at home. And sauerkraut, I remember when we had cabbage, they cut cabbage up, made sauerkraut. They put it in a big Red Wing crock, and they'd wash my feet, and then I'd have to go in there and I'd have to stomp the sauerkraut down, and then they put a big board over it and a rock on to squeeze the sauerkraut down. Then we made wine. They washed my feet, and I stomped the grapes just like they did in the old country. That's how they did it. And then you squeeze all the juice out of the grapes, and then eventually it ferments and becomes wine. They put it in bottles, and then it ferments and becomes wine. Those were some usual things. That's probably why I have bad feet today. Sticking them in sauerkraut and grapes all the time.
I think that's it.
Okay.
Is there any other story? Okay, I forgot one thing. You're an avid hunter. Have you have any stories from? I know that you had I guess I would call it sort of a gang or a bunch of hunting buddies that would go out and hunt every year. Do you have any fond memories with those guys hunting?
Two of my teammates, we've hunted over 50 years together, and a guy named Burley did a story on us, and he called it the Gang of 70s, because we were all 70 years old that day. But we hunted every fall ever since high school, except when we were in the service. So we used to lease land down by Morris, Minnesota, and Appleton, Minnesota. And we had many unusual and funny stories down there, of course. And it was a time when it was one of my passions. That's why, one of the reasons why I gave up football coaching was so I could do more hunting. But we'd kid each other all the time. And
do you have any, I wouldn't say kidding or anything, but just like a fond, like one memory that sticks out in your head of like a special hunt or something like that?
Can I interrupt 1 second? Can we take your truck to take bikes? Can you take the van? Or you don't? No more.
Let's see. Where are you going to take the truck?
To the Heartland Trail?
Yeah, I can ask.
Yeah, well.
I can take the car, yeah.
Can you take the van?
Sure. I don't need the truck, no.
Okay. Because
I've got to leave.
Yeah, we have Paul's truck filled too.
Yeah, the keys are in.
Okay.
You know where they're at?
Yep.
Okay.
Last question, just if you have one fond memory that sticks out from hunting.
One,
like a certain day or a special hunt or.
Well, one day is nothing big unusual. We had a lot of unusual things, but we were hunting pheasants, and my buddy to the left of me, there's three of us, we were walking a slough, and the bird gets up, and we'd call either hen or rooster, so we knew we couldn't shoot any hens. And so my buddy Don Gorel, bird gets up and he calls it a hen, and all of a sudden, boom, I hear a shot, and down goes a rooster. So he called the wrong call so he could get a shot, and he knocked down the rooster. And I never let him forget about that. So, but there was many, many stories, you know. You hunt with two guys for 50 years, it's pretty unusual. You have all kinds of things that happen to us.
All right, well, thank you very much, Grandpa.
You're welcome. Yeah, I thought maybe you were going to ask about other races or anything like that. So that's not in there, huh? Like Indians.
Oh, well, you can talk if you have a couple more minutes. I can. Do you have any memories of other of people that you met, like Native Americans or other races, different stereotypes?
Yeah, like I told you, in South St. Paul, we didn't get exposed to many unless we went to St. Paul for games or something. But I remember the first Indian I saw, I was kind of scared, and then all of a sudden I remember he was in the Marine Corps, and he was a Cherokee Indian, and he was the most fiercest fighter and went through boot camp as the toughest guy I ever met, and in the Marine Corps we called him Chief. And then when I got back in coaching, I had a kid who was a Mexican kid, and he just wouldn't go. I mean, he'd die for me. I mean, that guy ran and ran and ran. I had to stop him because he wanted to train so much. His name was Abner Arruja. He came from Mexico. And then another guy I had was a pole vaulter. And he came from, I don't know, Colorado, I believe. And I remember the story of him. He just was a very poor pole vaulter, but he wanted to come out, and the kids accepted him because we didn't have many minorities at that time. But he ended up going 15-6 and winning the conference in 4 years. So when I speak to groups, even today, I tell them this. I said, I don't care if you're pink, blue, red, green, white, black. I don't care what color your skin is. When you're working with me and in this team, you're all one. And I don't care who you are, what religion you are, and you're just remember you're a team. So that's how I was successful, I think, in track and field without competing in it, because I coached it as a team. Every event was a position. Like in football, it would be a right guard. That would be the sprinters, and the pole vaulters were the fullbacks and so forth. We just made them blend all together, no matter what your color your skin is. And to this day, I hear from black kids who told me they've never been treated so good as when they were on my teams. So that's why I'm pretty proud of integrating, let's say, all the races and all the religions of the country. Another thing we did, when we traveled, I took them to a different church every Sunday if we were on the road on Sunday. And one of the highlights was going to a black Baptist church, and everybody's singing real loud, and the guys thought that was pretty good. And we had mostly white kids or Caucasian, but we exposed them to racial things at that particular time too. So I figured and a lot of coaches didn't do that. So we did some unusual things as far as our coaching technique. We always told them that you're as good as you want to be, and you got to pull together no matter how tough it was. But we just had some unusual athletes that blended together, and you win that many championships. And I had 49 All-Americans, and they were all black, white, Indian, Trinidadian, blacks. It was all different across things. So you never judge a person by their skin and color of their skin, or what their ability may be when you're recruiting them. And I recruited 238 high schools in one season, and they'll never come close to that because I just go in there and talk to everybody. My recruiting was pretty good because I learned how to recruit in the Marine Corps and how to handle it. Back then we used to bring me into the whole school, and they dismissed school, and I'd talk to the whole school in Minneapolis and St. Paul for assembly and talk to them about the Marine Corps and the war. So if you're true and honest with people, I mean, it goes a lot further when you try to tell stories that don't make much sense. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I got to get in uniform.
Thanks, Grandpa.
Yeah, anytime. Take care and study hard. Be what you want to be. Do what you want to do.